We are live. Welcome to this 79th web talk from Elaad, this time in cooperation with the OpenADR Foundation. My name is Erik van Kaathoven. I'm head of the communication here at Elaad, and Elaad is testing and researching smart and sustainable charging. We are an initiative of the joint Dutch grid operators. Today, our guests are Arjan Wargers from Elaad and Rolf Bienert from the OpenADR Foundation. Both of you welcome. Their presentation is a brief introduction in what for many is a not yet well-known the OpenADR protocol that will soon be crucial in the rollout of smart and grid-aware charging. In the expert panel, we will also have Robert Monteboom from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management to join us. If you have questions, you can insert them in the questions box. Please do so. We appreciate this. And this web talk is recorded and will be available on YouTube later today. So without further ado, let's start. Arjan, Rolf, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks Erik. I'm kicking off. I assume that you hear me well, so I will start with the first sheet. I will tell you something about how we applied OpenADR for grid-aware charging for public charge infrastructure in the Netherlands. As Erik said, my name is Arjan. I'm working also for Elaad in the innovations group of Elaad, where we have quite a focus on improving interoperability for public chargers, of course, but also for other connected assets. And then now a little bit about the background. This is a picture of the development of congestion. And as in many pictures, red is not good, which means that we have quite some capacity bottlenecks on the medium voltage level. And we also see some challenges coming for low voltage. So this is the reason why we are now in the phase of developing grid-aware charging. Another picture to clarify, in the case of dumb charging, what you see here, the green peaks are on top of the regular blue household consumption profile. So you see that without communication, without shifting the peak, you see that the green peak of the EVs, they hit the red threshold of the available capacity there, while at the same time there is enough room during the night and during midday. And that is exactly what grid-aware charging is doing. Also the case, also about the background, that the green peak overriding the existing grid capacity, it is not occurring on every location at the same time. So there will be some places where we need grid-aware charging and some places where there is still enough capacity. So that's also a reason why we need to make this application dynamic, and why we need communication between DSO and CPO. In the basics, this is what it is: grid-aware charging, a profile of available capacity. Applying this will reduce your peaks with 40 to 50, even in some pilots to 60%, while at the same time ensuring enough kilowatt hours to your car to be charged. So this is in the basic what it is. Coming from this basics, from multiple pilots up to 10, we agreed between DSO, CPOs, and other stakeholders to develop this grid-aware charging according to the grid-aware charging guidelines. It was already in the course of last year. And what does it exist? Reducing peak power on a profile to reduce peak power on a group of chargers. So it are clusters of chargers where this profile is communicated to, where there is autonomy for the CPO to divide the reduced capacity due to the different chargers in that group. New and existing charge points. new and existing charge points. And this is what we as Elaad are doing. We are facilitating the process to come to this automatic messaging from DSO to CPO. The agreements between DSOs and CPOs are in a DSO CPO capacity limiting contract, and we as Elaad are facilitating the technical messaging. And for this, we chose OpenADR. Also, already in 2024, we sat together with the CPOs and the DSOs involved, and we chose for OpenADR. And one of the major aspects for the choice of OpenADR is that we needed a protocol where there is autonomy for the CPO. So it is more or less a request from the system of the DSO to the system of the CPO, and not a control signal from the DSO to a device, in this case a charge point of a third party. And yeah, this is more or less one of the basic aspects why we chose OpenADR. It should also be, there is some urgency. It should be quite easy to implement, and so on and so on. But this was the basics for the choice for OpenADR. And how does this work? I think Rolf will explain a bit more in the next session of this presentation. But in basics, the DSO as a top node communicates an event, and this event then consists of this profile of available capacity to the CPO, the virtual end nodes. In this case, the CPO polls for data and receives this capacity profile already 48 hours in advance. So it can react on this reduced capacity already for 48 hours in advance. OpenADR also supports reporting back, and this is something we do not need yet in this first version of OpenADR for grid-aware charging. The involved parties, this was developed under the NL, so the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management is also involved. The three largest DSOs and 8 CPOs are doing now the implementation actually, and Elaad is facilitating the specification and also helping supporting the implementation where we can. So OpenADR is supporting quite a large stack of use cases, if I may call it like that, and we only for grid-aware charging picked what is necessary for that. So we chose a mechanism which is called import capacity limit, and the grid-aware charging implementation fully compliant with version 3.0 of OpenADR. So based on a REST API and JSON message sets, and we work together as Elaad with the OpenADR Alliance. So the DSO publishes capacity schedules, the CPO retrieves the schedules, the limits, and further it's very basic implementation, no extra aspects added there. Clean and scalable, one-way control, so to speak. What is the status now at this moment? The specification of the first implementation is completed now. There are already wishes and needs for the further versions of grid-aware charging through OpenADR. The implementation is already started. So Leander and Vattenfall are the first one to have actually now a running system in place where at least 10 groups, 10 clusters of chargers are being grid-aware charged, so to speak, and the other parties are following this year or early next year. What we did as well, we provided a test tool for DSOs and CPOs to test their implementation. So if the specification, DSOs and CPOs are working on implementation, they can communicate to a test system, improve the implementation, and then connect with each other. And we also made some open source building blocks under OpenADR to facilitate the DSOs and the CPOs working on grid-aware charging, probably, or also other stakeholders can make use of these building blocks. So what we did now is we facilitated this chain. We facilitated this process. The DSO can communicate capacity limits with OpenADR to the CPO system. And the CPO then disaggregates the aggregated capacity limit to different EVSEs, charge points, and usually it is communicated with OCP to the different stations involved. And last sheet before handing over to Rolf, and this chain is now developed in development. But next to public EVSEs, we have also other devices which are quite grid intensive and can also provide flexibility. So in potential, they're also flexible. So we are thinking also about this chain. So why not communicate to home energy management systems or other home connected assets, at least the management system of these assets, not the assets itself, with OpenADR. So in different projects, pilot projects, I must say we are working on this chain. We're also working on the last mile from the HAMs to the connected assets. But this is something for which we are in pilots and in also discussions with involved stakeholders. So this could be a next step. So that was my first short introduction of what we did in the Netherlands with OpenADR. Rolf, can I pass it on to you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Arjan. Good to hear the progress there. So Arjan, of course, explained already a little bit how OpenADR works, but for those of you that are completely new to this, I wanted to give a little more background on where OpenADR comes from, and in fact, why it does or why it works the way Arjan has explained, which was an advantage for their deployments there. So if you go to the next slide, we see that OpenADR has been around since quite some time. So you see this going back more than 20 years here in California originally, where an energy crisis, which caused essentially rolling blackouts, triggered the California Energy Commission to find a way to more effectively communicate to the customer side. So you saw the picture earlier, DSO to either HAMs or CPO or other customer side systems. And that was really the goal here, to not just turn off whole cities or parts of cities, but rather ask for a certain, at that point, reduction of load. So that was the main goal, of course, 20 years ago, to just flatten the peaks of the consumption and nothing else really. So as you can see, I'm not going to go through all the details, but OpenADR 1, if we want to call it that way, was then started in early 2000, and then the first programs were started in the 2006-07 time frame, just before the unfortunate economic slowdown, the global crisis there. But for us, in fact, it was, in a sense, a good development, not because of the crisis, of course, but because there was more government money poured into standards development at the time. So we combined way more use cases to the general idea of demand response. At the time, nobody called it flexibility. Now, of course, everybody does. We call it just demand response. And the framework for the OpenADR 2.0 specification was then created. However, this was still more of a standardization effort in the industry, but nobody did any kind of testing, certification, and so on. So a number of stakeholders, including some utilities, some product companies, decided, okay, we do need something to really kind of make this interoperable, make this work for most scenarios. And the OpenADR Alliance was then started late 2010. So we then defined the first specifications, OpenADR 2.0A, which is a kind of limited spec for simple devices, and then 2.0B, which is probably the spec that is most used in the US and globally. As you can see here, Japan jumped on board, Korea, other places. We became an IEC published standard in 2018. But of course, as you can imagine, if anybody of you ever had taken a look at OpenADR 2, you will notice it's XML code. It's a SOAP exchange model. It was leaning strongly on older IEC specs as well. So, more and more often we receive the comments from the developers, oh, XML is getting old, right? So we want something newer. And after a lot of deliberations, we decided, okay, instead of making changes to the existing 2.0B, which would be problematic for interoperability, why not add a spec which is now OpenADR 3, and that is now a little bit different than 2.0 was, but I'll get back to that. So go to the next slide, please. So you already saw the basic setup, so I'm not gonna stick to this very long, but again, as Arjan said already, OpenADR is in most, if not all cases, always between peer-to-peer connections from a demand response management system. Sometimes it's called a DERMS or whatever you wanna call it, that sits at the DSO to the customer side. So I'm gonna get into that a little more, so we don't need to stay here too long. So if you go to the next slide, just a quick snapshot here. As it was already said, the OpenADR Alliance is also a non-profit organization, like many of the standards groups. And our members, of course, are the ones that actually make products, both the end nodes and the top nodes. So as already said, 2.0A has come out about 13 years ago, 2.0B 12 years ago, and OpenADR 3 now a little more than 1 year, with the first certified products earlier this year, I believe in May. We have 10 test houses globally and quite a number of certified systems and members, of course. So if you go to the next slide, we can quickly again review this so that it's really clear for everybody. Oops, sorry, I have one in between here. I wanted to actually do the summary here real quick for the audience in case this is of interest. We recently did a bit of research, and we realized that it's quite well used in the US, of course, already. So we determined that about 50% of the customers in the US are connected to utilities that have OpenADR-based programs. So this is not to say that 50% of the customers in the US are already participating in programs, because there is not honestly that many programs there for the customers. But again, from a utility perspective, the utilities that use that we know of that use OpenADR in one or the other shape and form, serve about 50% of the customer base. As I said already, Japan has recently expanded the use, very similar to what Arjan said for the Netherlands, from the DSO to some aggregation point. OpenADR is mandatory in several areas and circumstances, and the other countries are also experimenting a lot. In fact, New Zealand's biggest utility, Transpower, uses OpenADR now since 2019 as well. So for Europe, we are seeing this starting. Arjan already talked about, of course, the flex charging. Sweden has started doing this. In fact, they have an OpenADR 3 virtual top node. The UK has several areas that work on this. The Energy Networks Association is defining the flex market communications, very similar to what is being done in the Dutch market. And the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero is also working on programs with that. I'm also talking to a number of other countries, which I don't really want to name yet because it's early in the process there. So if you go to the next slide, and just really quick again, so that it's clear for everybody. Arjan already showed this slide with the different actors here, and I wanted to make sure everybody understands the terms here. So for us, we have what we call the virtual top node, or the VTN. What that typically is, as I mentioned, it's a server or a system that understands the resources. They know what's out there, they know what is connected, and often it is connected to a DSO in one way or shape or form. Sometimes it's more of a manual API, or it could, of course, analyze certain mechanisms as well in the grid and issue events based on that. So the VTN then essentially creates these events. We call them events because they're, in a sense, very similar to a calendar notice. So you have a start time, you have an end time, and in that notice you can have a number of different signals, whether it's a price or energy consumption messages, capacity, whatever you have. So there's a whole list of different signals that are being sent there. The term virtual, really, for both sides was used at the time, again, 10, 15 years ago, because it doesn't have to be a server, a physical server, right? It can be in the cloud, it can be in the utility head-end system. Any of that is possible, and the same is true for the virtual end node, which is essentially the web services client. It could be a cloud-based controller. Many CPOs, for instance, have cloud-based controllers, so they are likely to receive OpenADR in their clouds. But it can, of course, be a gateway product. Arjan mentioned HEMS as well, which can be in the cloud or in the building, or any other downstream system that would want to receive these signals. So that's why we call these virtual. So as I already said, the virtual end node, the VN, the client, essentially pings the server and takes the event information from that. It can generate reports back to the DSO for them to make better decisions or to verify the participation and other things. So if you go to the next slide. So as I already mentioned, OpenADR 3, which is now relevant for the Dutch market, but it also is starting to take a hold in Europe in general, is an additional standard. So we expect utilities that already run OpenADR 2 programs to continue that for now. But VTNs may choose to add OpenADR 3 for other programs, new programs, and so on. And in particular, in areas where we don't see flexibility down to the customer being active yet, there it makes sense to start with OpenADR 3, which was used then also in the Netherlands. So it's now a REST API based on JSON. So much different than what you have seen before, but it maintains the general concepts of OpenADR to send informational and motivational messages. So if you go to the next slide, not going through all of this, but if you want to really kind of compare this, maybe one of the biggest differences, aside of course from REST API and JSON, is that in the latest version now also supports subscriptions and MQTT, which is nice for real subscription models. And the certification testing from the Alliance side is now all essentially online, because we're using a web services system. The test tool is in the Amazon cloud, so it became much less expensive than for OpenADR 2.0. So if you go to the next slide, this will be quick here. So you don't have to read this, it's just to give you the example. So in OpenADR 2.0b, we had a XML code based on existing internet structures like WS Calendar. Again, I believe that's also what Outlook uses to this day. So these calendar notices as well as these messages were fairly big, a little, as you can see, a little convoluted, because you have to go into the details to submit a small thing. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that not only because the font is bigger, but it's much easier to read the event context. Even if you have to verify something as the developer, you can even read it yourself. And in fact, in the latest spec version, we have now also added, or I should say, first you're seeing here, for instance, on the left side, the program information. On the right side is the submission of 4 different price intervals. And what we have done in the latest version, we actually added also an interval function for prices, so that these 4 lines, these 4 identical lines with the payloads, can in fact be just one line that has all these values separated by commas, so even shorter. And we added greenhouse gas emissions, some emergency messages, and of course a whole lot of other signal types here. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to just briefly then kind of circle back to what Arjan already said, that OpenADR really prefers to what we like to call inform and motivate. So we don't, it was an old mandate. In fact, 20 years ago, the California Energy Commission already, thought it would not always be a great idea to directly change parameter at the customer side. After all, the equipment is owned by the customer. Might there be emergency messages? Yes, of course. This can be discussed and can be contractually organized, but OpenADR prefers to send these more motivational messages. Again, it could be a price, it could be the request for energy reduction or increase, and so on and so forth. And in fact, a very similar model as the one Arjan showed is being used in the US since a while. OpenADR sending, for instance, a general message to CPOs, and then they can decide, okay, how to respond to that, right? Which charges to decrease or increase, and often OCPP is used for that. Because OpenADR does it that way, it's actually very easy to integrate it with downstream standards. The HEMS we saw earlier in Arjan's slide, there needs to be, or I should say, first, I actually have it even written here, there's no translation between the two, really. So imagine you get a price to a home energy management system, or the CPO gets a price. It's not being translated to, let's say, the refrigerator or the pool pump, but rather the system, the aggregation point, can then make decisions based on customer presets on how to act in the building, in the charge point network, and so on. So that's why it's pretty easy to connect this to these downstream standards. All right, I think that was pretty much it. If there was something else I wanted to mention. No, okay, very good. So then I give it back to the moderator here, I think.
Yes, thank you, Rolf. Thank you, Arjan, for your presentation. Some words were not comprehended by everyone. Arjan, you told DSO, TSO, CPO, not free C3PO, but CPO. Can you explain this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry for that, Erik. You've been hammering about that for some while already. But CPO, what I mean with CPO is the charge point operator. So the market party who operates charge points. The DSO is the distribution system operator. So the original operator of the medium and the low voltage network. And I did not think I mentioned the TSO, but the TSO is the transmission system operator who manages the high voltage network.
Thank you.
We can have some lists of abbreviations.
Okay, thank you. Now it's time to ask Robert to join us, Robert Monteban. Yeah, there he is. Great. Robert, you'll join us for the panel. Can you please introduce yourself? Who are you? Which organization are you working for? And what is your link with this subject?
How much time do I have, Erik? Because I can carry on I can dwell on now. All jokes aside, my name is Robert Monteban. I work for the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And within this ministry, we're basically responsible for the smooth rollout of charging infrastructure, for which we established some years ago the Dutch executive board for the group, which is called the ElaadNL, the Dutch basically program where all partners relevant to the smooth rollout of charging infrastructure are represented. And in that particular ElaadNL, we organized a group which is called the Smart Charging Group, where we have all relevant parties in charge of the basically smooth introduction of smart charging to be present there. And yeah, we try to facilitate the smooth development of our smart charging infrastructure.
Hey, thank
you want me to dwell on like who's on that particular board? You just let me know.
Yeah, people can look that up on the websites, I guess. But it's my next question would be, what is the importance of OpenADR in the smart and grid-aware charging for the Netherlands, Robert?
Well, as we know, by 2030, 85% of the electricity consumption will be generated by renewables. And we know we have, we need to create space on our grid. And we also want to have EV drivers involved in the smooth transition to, let's say, a future-proof energy system. Electric vehicles have a lot to offer, not only zero-emission mobility, but also they can act as a battery on wheel, harnessing the renewables, creating that space, and so on. For that reason, we established this program. And by the end of this year, we hope to be at 60% of all charging activities or transactions will be carried out in a smart, but most important thing, smooth way, for which we need to have unification of the communication between all parties. So from I love it when Arjan used the DSO, but I wanted to use the grid operator to the actual charging point operator, to the mobility service provider, all the way to the end user. And by doing so, we need to have, let's say, a flawless system in place, a data interface, so we can upscale the actual, all the steps we'd like to proceed in, towards a very smooth situation. So everybody can participate in this program.
Great. And why did you choose OpenADR for this use?
Well, let's put it this way. It's not a Ministry of Infrastructure who decides upon which open standard to be using. It's up to the market. And we know last year, and it was part of our action plan, we decided to have a good conversation among all market parties So again, the grid operators and the charge point operators decide upon a certain communication protocol. And the data interface was basically agreed upon to be supported by OpenADR.
Okay, thank you. So for the people with less of a technical or IT background, is OpenADR just like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth in the end, in the sense that it has interoperability? And what do we miss if we don't do it this way? Perhaps Rolf or Arjan can answer this one.
Should I start, Arjan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Well, so you specifically said for the not so technical people, okay. It's not entirely the same, because the standards you mentioned are specific message exchange protocols, specific wireless protocols, right? That have a very specific communications, but in a way, the idea is the same, yes. So there is a more application layer focused protocol in OpenADR, which can connect the devices. Now, for instance, this connection could actually go over Wi-Fi, right? Bluetooth might not typically be in the link, but can go over Wi-Fi, cellular service, broadband. You know, wherever you have an internet connection, you can exchange OpenADR signals essentially. And but generally, you are completely correct. The idea is that okay, there's a specific way of implementing the standard, which Arjan and the team has been working on, so that then for the customer, interoperable solutions can be made available. And of course, you know, Bluetooth Wi-Fi, they have thousands of members globally, so they agreed on one way of doing it. And we are really also hoping that, you know, for instance, with the Dutch profile, that this is a good starting point, right? Also for maybe other European countries to not necessarily do their own, but rather use the Dutch you know, system as a good template, right? Maybe make some adjustments to it, but that would be, from our perspective, ideal, right? Because at the end of the day, a manufacturer, you know, the less customization they have to do for different areas, different countries, different regions, you know, the easier it is for them to deploy successful systems.
Thank you. So Arjan, you to add another question to this, for the people a little bit more interested, of with more knowledge on the EV charging ecosystem, they have all heard of the OCPP protocol. In which way are those the same? In which way are those different?
Yeah, they're they cover a different interface on the total chain. So OpenADR is from the grid operator. Let's change how we call these companies, from the grid operator to the receiver. In this case, the charge point operator of public charging stations, and then from the system of the charge point operator, the CPMS, to the charge point. Then they talk OCPP, and then when also the charge point operator needs to inform the e-mobility service provider, then another language comes in. So to develop the total chain, and like also Robert explained, there are different standards applicable for different subsets of this chain. And so OpenADR and OCP, they align, and they are not on the same the same part of the chain.
Yeah, thank you. Well, is this the first time we have a chain of both OCPP and OpenADR, Rolf?
Yeah, as I briefly mentioned, it is actually pretty common in areas like California, Colorado. You know, a lot of the coastal regions in the US are using it that way. Often the OpenADR link is mandated by the utility, because the utility or the grid operator or DSO, whatever we want to call it, you know, they want to maintain just one server, one resource server, and one access point, right? So So they just like what Robert said, you know, you want to harmonize that so you don't have a new integration for every charge point operator, every HEMS and so on out there. So often the OpenADR link is mandated until now. Often OpenADR 2.0b as mentioned. You know, now for the Dutch market OpenADR 3. And then OCPP is often like the recommended link to the individual chargers, because they kind of, you know, they are typically owned by the charge point operator, right? So the utility, the grid operator only has, you know, influence, but not really a say over how the charge point operator runs his system. So, but it is a very common thing. I mean, OCPP is a great spec for that. Like Arjan said, it combines other functionalities towards the customer, you know, from payments to other things, and it makes total sense to also use a standard there.
Okay, Robert, you mentioned that you started a process to get to this choice for OpenADR. Was this a challenging process, or was everyone agreeing very quickly?
I think it took a year. It could have been done, I think, a bit quicker, because there are still, as we all understand, you need to align with all the various parties. So it was not just a walk in the park. Basically, everybody had to agree upon the way forward, and it took a bit longer, but we managed to do this within a year, which I think is perhaps Rolf can comment on that, but I think that's feasible without major hiccups. So yeah,
Thank you.
just 1 year is okay.
I would agree. You know, in the standards world, it's it just takes time, right? Whether you want to agree on the functionalities of one standard, or like Robert said, on using, you know, a variety of standards, or selecting one, it just you know, doesn't go from one day to the next. That's a very common scenario.
Yeah, and perhaps I may add to this, Rolf, also what we're trying to do, I think, still with electric vehicles or electric mobility and the charging infrastructure, I think we're still ahead of the game. But we already noticed that other assets that also require, let's say, an interface are lagging behind. So what are you going to do? Are you now going to wait until the other assets are at the same, let's say, speed as we are, or are you going to take the first step and then see whether you can later on reconcile with those assets? And that's the typical chicken and the egg discussion.
Yeah, Arjan, that's also an idea you told us about, for example, the home energy management systems, which control charging speed, but also heat pumps, solar panels. You can also use OpenADR for that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Come back to that, but the point I would like to make that it's very important to pick a standard and not to develop something new. And there are different standards for different interfaces, and it's important to stick to that. Standards do improve interoperability. They save cost. They prevent vendor lock-in. There is no reason not to pick a specific standard. And OpenADR as such, that at least that's our experience, also based on the improvements which were made from 2B to 3.0, is that it's quite easy to implement. And just to add on that, Erik, OpenADR as such, easy to implement on the grid operator side and the CPO side, and it's also extendable. We have now chose import capacity limit for this profile, but when you want to have other use cases, like for example bidirectional charging, you can choose another mechanism, a message set, to activate that. And when you already speak OpenADR, these additions are quite easily to add on the existing connectivity.
Yeah, that's also one of the questions coming in. For example, how do you deal with bidirectional charging? But also someone is asking about is there any cybersecurity requirements in this OpenADR? Rolf, perhaps you are the main guy to go to for this answer.
I can give it a shot. I have to admit I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so I'm going to use high-level terms that I that I know. But no, absolutely, of course. Cybersecurity has always been a big question, right? In particular, if you create a link from the grid operator to the customer side, so you're getting outside the network there. In fact, maybe I should also mention first that one of the reasons why OpenADR is also well used in the US is that aside from the cybersecurity that I will talk about in a second, it also actually provides a bit of a demarcation point between the customer-owned equipment or the customer-side equipment and the grid operator. Reason for that is, again, that we're sending motivational messages, right? So there is no control signal directly going back and forth, right? So even if somebody were to hack into, let's say, a CPO, which of course they need to make sure that this is not happening, but it's we know these days any encryption, any security protocol can be broken with enough effort and time. So even if somebody gets into the CPO, yes, they could potentially then not react to signals and such, which is not a good thing, but they will not be able to tunnel back to the grid operator and make changes there, right? So that's that natural demarcation. But of course, that being said, we want to make sure that the link is secured. So it uses a typical transport layer security, TLS 1.2, 1.3 and higher, which is one of the latest the mechanisms. And in OpenADR 3, we have decided to use mechanisms that are extremely common today in online communications, like with banks and others. So there's a function of OAuth 2, which is an internet protocol function for the exchange of tokens and bearer tokens, which again, I don't want to try and go into detail of that, but essentially there's tokens being exchanged in this, and this is something that's being used very, very commonly now in all sorts of internet connectivity systems. So yes, so the link is very much secured here. Again, I want to emphasize, this does not relieve like the charge point operator or the HEMS folks, or of course also the grid operator from securing their systems, right? Because that has nothing to do then with OpenADR, right? If somebody clicks on one of these AI-generated email links, which look really, really, really good these days, I always like to caution people there.
Yeah,
that's how you get people in your system, right?
Yeah, and for the other question about is it also possible to do bidirectional charging vehicle to grid options with the OpenADR link now or in the future?
Yeah. So I mean, maybe Arjan has more specific information on that, of course, but from our perspective, absolutely. So there's two aspects here. I'm trying to keep it short. That there's two aspects. One is that by doing bidirectional charging, essentially you're providing another grid resource, right? So you're just providing another big battery, really, right? That's the interesting fact there, right? So you can either just run your house with it. That's kind of like a more of a local control system, or you could feed back to the grid as well. So for us, that's like the same signals as we were already using for other resources, right? So you can either say, hey, can you give me some power, or you want to charge now, or the price is low, or now the price is high, give me power. So all of this is exactly the same for us, whether you have an EV charger, a pool pump, or a solar system, right? So there's no there's no particular
difference
from a flexibility market, right? So there are some questions about, will large inverters, and in particular a large number of big inverters, will they disturb the grid, the power quality, for instance, because they're obviously not quite as perfect in quotation marks here as like a power plant and so on. And also, do we need to at some point, for instance, reduce exports, specifically again inverters also with solar, right? Do we need to curtail the export there? So again, a lot of this still works just fine with OpenADR. And if you really need to set the electrical parameters of an inverter, so with other words, like how it connects, voltages, pass-through voltages, volt-var curves, to get into this a little bit, there is obviously inverter control standards on the inverter itself. IEEE 2030.5, you saw it in the picture that Arjan showed. Modbus, SunSpec, and so on. These are protocols running on the inverter that can actually make these tweaks. And you can, for instance, also use OpenADR to actually send these objectives down. We specifically in the user guide for OpenADR 3, in fact, added based on request from another country, added, for instance, dynamic operating envelopes. We added these volt-var curve transmissions, so you can essentially give again a management entity these objectives, and then they can use downstream standards to adjust the inverters. So everything needed for V2G is absolutely possible.
Yeah, Arjan, any adjustments to that? Or?
Yeah, so on what Rolf said, on protocol level we set, but and also a link to Robert. You can make the chain technically, but you also need the agreements between the companies who own the assets and the company who wants flexibility, and that's also something which comes in place in vehicle to grid, public charger, so to speak, and vehicle to home. Who is in need of flexibility? Next to protocols, you also have the discussion about architecture. Who through which chain is going to communicate to which other system? And that is something which will still remain on the table and keep us busy for some weeks.
Robert, on vehicle to grid options?
I mean, I think once we establish this platform and this data interface, I don't foresee any reasons why we shouldn't be carrying this on V2G. And V2G is in all fairness, is just around the corner. I mean, yeah, 28, 29, we expect a massive volume of electric vehicles being capable of V2G. So we need to be prepared.
Thank you. We have a lot of more questions. Some are the same subjects we already talked about, but some also new subjects. But we also have a clock running. So I have to give you all a same but last question, which is a rather open question. But what do you think happens next? What if we look a few years ahead? What will be then? How will the future look like? Let's start with Robert, and then Arjan, and then Rolf.
Well, first of all, I'd like to compliment the fact that we have this data interface unified. But the next step is how to get the data from the mobility service in between the charge point operator and the mobility service provider. We're working on that to get unification in that data interface, because in the end user needs to know what the actual power is he or she is going to get. So that's the next step. But yeah, we're working on that.
Okay, thank you, Arjan.
The expansion I see, Eric, of the need for expansion is towards other grid-intensive devices, which are, when they are connected, they can also offer a lot of flexibility. And I would like to add one thing more. We could all the flex mechanisms we are using now is envelope-based control or providing an envelope of available capacity. This could also change. So other devices, but also other mechanisms to extract flexibility.
Thank you, Rolf.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a slightly different spin, more of a, what I would love to see, for our industry is that we need to really start, thinking about the customer, right, and making it simple for the customer, right? I see that in the US, it's nice that they started 20 years ago, as I showed you. And of course, they had the need for it. So I'm not saying it was wrong or anything, but we started with thermostats. Then it's the ventilation system. Then it's the lighting system. Now I think in California, pool pumps need to be able to connect to OpenADR, right? So all of a sudden, the customer is confronted with, okay, I have 4 or 5 different systems, and now do I need to connect to 5 different programs? This gets for the regular customer that's not like a geek like all of us, right? Way too complicated, right? So I think we need to all as an industry work towards a simple solution for the customer, right? From charging to the HEMS network, the virtual power plant in the house, and so on. That should be like a goal for that. That's a bit of a stretch goal, but I think that will get the customer buy-in, right? It needs to be simple for them, and it somehow needs to save them, something at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. We look forward to this future, this few years ahead. Thank you, Arjan and Rolf, for your presentation. Thank you, Robert, for joining us for the panel. Thank you all for watching and for putting in the questions. For the next web talk, keep an eye on our social media. We'll let you know when it is and where it is, what it is about. This web talk will soon be available on YouTube. And thanks again all, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.